trepanning. This story took place after the apocalyptic war during the worm pandemic. Lobodo was infected with worms, and the worms getting into his brain. He received a referral to Dr. Jane Wormsley, Department of Helminthology, Lumpkins University in Yamaville. What is this all about? It will not be a waste of your time. Don't worry. It will be very rich and edifying. What is it about? The answer is in the question. And don't worry, this is not a waste of time. This is Lobodo Channel, a place of exploration and friendliness. This will be edifying. It's worthwhile to sit back in wonderment and contemplate the situation.
We're gonna have a jolly good time. Jolly good time.
I'll tell you in a nutshell the brief story of how Lobodo became infected with worms, how worms got into Lobodo's brain. When Lobodo first arrived in Yamaville, he had no place to stay. It was in the middle of a heat wave, so he lay down under some bushes. He made himself comfortable under some shrubs in a park near a fence, far from the sidewalk and far from surveillance cameras. And there were some mushrooms growing in the park. Grandmother had taught him about mushrooms, but somehow he must have ate the wrong mushroom because he began dancing around and wandering in an erratic manner. And he left his little shelter under the bush by the fence, and he left the park. And he ended up, he didn't know how, it seemed like walking forever down city streets. He ended up in a community garden where there was a compost bin. He passed out in the compost bin. He woke up in the morning with a large growth on the side of his head. It was large, itchy, scabby. When he scratched it, a little worms appeared under his fingernails. And so he went to a clinic.
Le gouvernement du Canada leur subventionne des appartements avec meublés pour la faire des HLM, l'électricité fournie, sanitaire fournie, avec des puits.
Fascinated, and he was friends with a research doctor at Lumpkins University by the name of Dr. Jane Wormsley, so he gave a personal referral. He actually picked up the phone in order to cut through all the red tape, and he called a taxi. Lobadeau was given a taxi ride over to Lumpkins University, where a secretary escorted him to the research lab of Dr. Jane Wormsley, where she proceeded to take samples of the worms oozing out of this pulpy growth on the side of Lobadeau's head, and she examined the worms under the microscope. And they did a CAT scan and a worm scan, and they found that worms had gotten into Lobadeau's brain. But that's another story in itself. Most of the worms, fortunately, were concentrated in the growth on the side of Lobadeau's head. A dozen worms had gotten into Lobadeau's brain and were circulating through his bloodstream.
Trepanning. Dr. Jane Wormsley took a scalpel and removed the sore on the side of Lobadeau's head, and then she took a small device and cut a hole in a skull the size of a quarter, a 25-cent piece, a hole, trepanning. She wanted to see the worm damage, where the worms had entered his brain, and she pulled a couple worms out with a pair of tweezers, and then she lightly prodded his brain with her finger.
Cutting a little hole in the skull, and she set it aside the hole the size of 25 cents, the size of a quarter, and she inserted lightly prodded his touch of her finger on his brain, sent a shock of the touch of Jane Wormsley's finger, the light pressure. He looked into her eyes, and she looked at him, and she touched him again. And then she touched him again, and it was like electricity shot out from his brain into her fingertips and into her heart, and at the same time, from her heart, electricity flowed out through her fingertips and into his brain, and there was a mix of their beings. They were like two. He had the image of two atoms coming together and bonding to form a molecule.
It reminded us of how he had awakened Robin in the dumpster. A robin had landed on his shoulder and was tugging away at something, and at first he thought something was pulling on his hair. And he sat up just as Robin flew off onto the edge of the compost bin with a worm dangling from its mouth. But the robin had a worm from the door on the side of Lobadeau's head and was eating the worm. He watched the robin head jerk a few times. The worm flopped around like a piece of string and then went down and went into the gullet of the robin. And that's the image that came to his mind. She was scraping away, removing the pulpy mess on the side of his brain. And she put it in a special container for future examination.